In the early 80s, we had new members come, maybe younger members, and they wished to have an added worship service and to include contemporary praise
Okay.
and to be less structured.
Because they were split, people were split, they decided to have an early service prior to before Sunday school class.
And in that early service, I believe it was totally egalitarian, but women prayed, they preached and reading meditations. There was a sharing.
For communion, we would all gather, men, women, children, up around the communion table. We would share our hearts, speak testimonies. We would pray around in a circle sometimes, and everybody got to pray who wanted to. Before church started, if anybody wanted to start a song, if I started singing a song, everybody joined in.
I don't know when or why the early service stopped meeting, but when that happened, it seems to me you have a group of women who have been participating in worship who are now stuck back in the cave, so to speak.
The elders and Bill Love started doing a wonderful study about the role of women in the church. So this was going on since 1974 when Bill came. We're now in 85 and 84. So it's 10 years in the making.
This was done not as an accommodation to culture. This was done as a trying to understand the New Testament teaching of the role of women.
And so people did not want to offend the folks that would have been offended if a woman got up and spoke.
It says here, May 12, 1974.
Okay.
And the Mother's Day sermon was Liberation of Women in the Church. 1974.
74. Bill Love preached that sermon.
Yes.
And then there's this, which is priceless to me because it is also a report to the church from the elders, which was read by Buddy Garner in July of 1988. And then it's followed by 4 complete text sermons that Bill Love preached on the topic.
Kathy and Ann were doing a study of the scriptures as far as women in leadership. And Lynn Mitchell was very active, and he was a biblical scholar and definitely had, knew the original language. And
there were people who were happy to say they were studying it, but they weren't going to do anything. And I remember one day in church, I tapped Kathy on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Kathy, I've got this great outline. Do you want to teach a Sunday school class on women in ministry from the scripture?" And Kathy is excellent. If anybody, to me, has done more for Bering Drive to change the culture there, it would be Kathy Straker, because Kathy is a very good educator. And Kathy said, "Yes, but we're going to read for a year and we're going to study and research this deeply."
We went to the parlor class, and it was very free discussion. And some of the people in that class were more upset and more angry and concerned about women's issues. I don't remember being just feeling like I needed to fight my way through it. I did share my heart.
The first class that we did was an adult Sunday school class. And I certainly didn't feel qualified to talk theologically. And we were naive enough to think that in 13 weeks we could actually do justice to the culture, the history, women in church history. I mean, I'm like, that's nuts. But we did it. And Kathy, as a good educator, helped to break it up so it wasn't all lecture and it was fun and there was always time for people to talk. Back to the text.
Studying and discussion on it started in the parlor class for years. It would come up and come around. And we read Mission Magazine, Dwayne and Barbara Evans. When you have people like Dwayne and Barbara and like Lynn and Carol Mitchell and Rick and Kathy Straker and Ann and Ed Bayless, and I mean, and Carol and Rolf, oh my gosh. And then as, you know, more and more just people who just love God with all their heart started coming to Bering. It just grew. And it was like the Spirit of God just really moving in this.
I remember in like 1990, Lynn Mitchell calling me, and they were once again talking about, well, they were talking about women participating in the main church service. And I just remember him calling and asking me my opinion. And I said, yes, women need to participate in the main church service.
When it's assumed that men are and that I am not, I feel, and I would share just how it made me feel.
You see, my dear, in Egypt, I worked in an underground Church of Christ and was very, very dangerous because it's a Muslim country. We didn't have permission to meet. So that helped me because I actually did all the roles of the church. I worked every aspect of the church. So this gave me the idea, and of course I was a missionary nurse before that, how greatly and wonderfully women can be used by God.
This elders meeting in '02 that I took notes from, at least two of the elders mentioned that the way they learned to be elders was from their mothers and their wives. And that they thought it was, one of the elders said his sons had left the Church of Christ because women were not in leadership. And one of them said he wanted women to be in leadership so that his daughters would have that example, that opportunity, which was a huge driver for me.
They struggled with opening the eldership and with how do we call them elders? You know, the terminology was important. Do we call them shepherds? How do we say that? And then, of course, they eventually came to the pastoral team, and that because that seemed to be a more palatable way to present it.
They decided we'll have a pastoral group and women can participate in a pastoral group. So this was good, very good. By the grace of God, I was very honored to be chosen. And the one benefit God gave me with this is who I was working with. We have a bond because our time there was difficult, very difficult. The first time we did it. So it was Mary Charlotte Elliott, our sweet Martha Joe Smith, and Bayless, that you know.
Everybody listened to each other, and it was really good. Any suggestions we made were not cast aside. We talked about them and worked through the problems, and it worked. So it was a a loving relationship.
While we were serving on the pastoral team, guess what? We hired a wonderful young lady named Cynthia.
It was just recognizing, and it was taking place. And of course, Cynthia coming was very important.
If Kathy and I were talking, and I know what she would say,
Yeah.
when we started this out, my platform was, I really want to know what the scripture says, because if God is calling me to submit to all men forever and wear a bonnet and bake bread, that's what I'm going to do, because I love God. And Kathy laughs and said, oh no, my place was, if that's what the scriptures really said, I'm out of here. And so we were both blessed that that's not what the scripture said.
We believed it was God's will and what God wanted us to do.
Mhm.
I just, I'm just thankful for however it went, that I feel like it was the right thing.